honorable judges, esteemed guests, members and friends from the legal and non-legal fraternity, colleagues, friends, family. A very good evening and a very warm welcome to the 4th annual event of the Justice Ajay Kumar Tripathi Foundation. We have a very illustrious panel with us tonight. We are joined by Honorable Justice Abhay S, former Judge, Supreme Court of India. I request Ms. Aditi Tripathi to please escort Sir to the dais. We have among us Honorable Justice Najmi Waziri, former Judge, Delhi High Court. I request Ms. Akriti to please escort Sir to the dais. We have Mr. K. Parameshwar, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. I request Ms. Aditi to please escort him to the dais. To moderate today's event, we have Ms. Shahrukh Alam, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. I request Akriti to please escort Ms. Alam to the dais. Each November, we gather under the banner of this foundation. It was inspired from my father's belief that service must be purposeful and purpose must be humane. The foundation is our way of translating that conviction not into a memorial, but a movement. Born of a family's faith, it is growing into a platform that fosters a living conversation on the idea of India and the values which continue to guide the nation's conscience. In remembering my father, we reaffirm that remembrance itself can be a form of renewal. As we cherish his spirit tonight, we also celebrate the journey of the foundation. We took small but deliberate steps in the direction of collective stewardship. Through our continued tree plantation and rewilding efforts across Bihar and parts of the country, we have sought to restore green spaces, revive local biodiversity, and bring communities together around the shared act of renewal. Each sapling planted is a quiet tribute to continuity, to care, and to the conviction that environmental justice begins where we stand. We are grateful to the custodians who continue to send us regular updates on the upkeep of the planted saplings. Over the past 3 years, the Foundation has also discussed the idea of India through the lens of the judiciary, the Indian Constitution itself, and the doctrine of separation of powers. Each of these conversations sought to ask one enduring question. What is the idea of India today, and how do we, as citizens and custodians of the Constitution, sustain it? This year, our theme, Sustainable Development and the Idea of India Therein, takes that inquiry forward. India aspires to be a Viksit Bharat at 2047. After 75 years of independence, the India we are building must be the India that we are preserving. Between our economic ambitions and our ecological realities lie nuanced constitutional commitments. The challenge before us is not merely to grow, but to grow responsibly, not simply to develop, but to sustain. The Indian judiciary has long been at the heart of this dialogue. Through decisions, our courts have expanded the moral vocabulary of the Constitution to read constitutional and environmental justice as part of the right to life itself. Landmark judgments have reminded us that sustainability is not just an aspiration, it's a constitutional duty. We are deeply privileged to be joined by Justice Oak tonight. His judgments have consistently upheld a jurisprudence of conscience. By Justice Waziri, whose orders have redefined Delhi's relationship with its ecological inheritance and brought the poetry of public spaces back into Delhi's imagination. And by Mr. K. Parameshwar, who represents a generation of lawyers redefining environmental advocacy with clarity and conviction. Guiding tonight's conversation is Ms. Shahrukh Alam, whose constitutional work, writings, bridge the question of rights, governance, and social justice. We are grateful for her for moderating this trialogue and helping us bring nuance and reflection to the theme. Through this Samvaad, we hope to reflect on questions that are as urgent as they are timeless. Is it sustainable development that is already embedded in our constitutional imagination? Or is it something we must continue to consciously weave through judicial creativity and public will? Can the promise of growth coexist with the imperatives of justice, economic, social, and environmental, without one overpowering the other? These questions are not academic anymore. They are existential. They concern the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the dignity with which future generations will thrive. Without trying to preempt, for us, the idea of India has always been about balance between liberty and order, rights and duties, and preservation and progress. To sustain that balance is to sustain India itself. As we begin the conversation tonight, I feel my father's presence very closely. He believed that law's truest measure lies not in its verdicts, but in its vision, in how it shapes lives with fairness, dignity, and compassion. The foundation was created to preserve that spirit through reflection, dialogue, and faith in principled reform. It continues to grow through your participation and belief. To each one of you here tonight, I offer heartfelt gratitude for standing with us through this journey of ideas. On behalf of my mother, Mrs. Alka Tripathi, my sisters Aditi and Akriti, my brother-in-law Rahul, and the entire foundation team, I welcome you all once again to Samvaad 2.0. May this evening remind us that sustainable development is at heart an act of justice towards our people, our planet, and our posterity, a reaffirmation of the idea of a resilient, inclusive, and just India. With this, I hand the evening over to Shahrukh.
Thank you very much, Anushree. It's always a privilege to be able to speak from this platform, and thank you again for having me. Thank you very much. I've been told that I should introduce the topic in about 5 minutes, and then invite each speaker to also speak for about 5 minutes. But to begin, I've always been very scared of science and of technical knowledge generally. So therefore, I've been scared of environmental law, environmentalism. It seems to me to be very technical. There's COP3 and COP30 now, in fact. But when I started to read about this, I came across a quote that sort of caught my attention. And it said that environmentalism without class struggle is gardening, really. So if you're not talking about context, if you're not talking about land rights, you're talking about environmentalism, that's akin to gardening. And then I looked up the person who had said this. He's a Brazilian environmentalist, Chico Mendes, his name was. And he grew up working on a rainforest. Started at age 9 and then grew up to become an activist, fought for the preservation of the Amazonian rainforests, but also fought for the rights of the indigenous people and the rights of workers. And one thing again stood out. He was describing life on a plantation. And he said that one thing that they were very particular about was to not have any schools in the vicinity. And the reason being, and this is quite amazing, they didn't want plantation workers to even learn basic mathematics. They didn't want plantation workers to be able to do basic accounting, because then they'll calculate their wages and they'll calculate their work hours and all of that. And for him, this was also part of environmentalism. You can't talk about the Amazonian rainforests without talking about wages, without talking about people who work there. And I'm digressing a bit, but I was talking to a journalist who's just come back from Bihar. And he said to me, it was his first time in Bihar, incidentally, and he said, I'd heard so much about Bihar and how sharp the Biharis are and how good they are at academic. But I was very surprised this time, because time and again, when I was dealing with vendors, shopkeepers, they were constantly shortchanging themselves. They couldn't do basic arithmetic. And it came as a surprise, because this was not my experience growing up in Bihar. But then again, I was talking to people who know the education system in Bihar, and they said that, well, yes, the schools now are what they are, but it's also to do with malnourishment. Your brain freezes. There's so much poverty that the vendors are not able to do basic mathematics. They're constantly shortchanging themselves. So again, there are many ways to talk about and to think about sustainable development, to think about environmental justice, to think about climate justice. There's also this whole body of work on climate justice, which is not scientific, which is not technical, which is very much based in society. And it talks about three things. It talks about industrialization, talks about colonialism, talks about inequity, talks about socioeconomic justice. And there are again 3 points that caught my attention. The movement talks about the right to live in the city, not to be sort of sent off, rehabilitated in the suburbs and be made to come in every day and provide services to the middle classes and then have to leave again in the evening. So climate justice is actually saying that people have a right to live in the city. And we have the right to use services in the city. We have the right to use proper public transport. We have the right to use public infrastructure, drinking water, clean air, the works. And that is what the movement is demanding. The second thing that the movement is demanding is the right to politically participate in decisions to do with urban planning. The municipal corporation can't decide for me. The courts can't decide for me. The CEC can't decide for me. It's a claim to actual political participation in what will make the city, what will constitute urbanization of the city. And third of all, and this is very important also, is the right to acknowledge that climate change affects different people differently. The right to acknowledge that even within the city, people are differently affected by what goes on. So this brings us to the question of demolition. When slums on the Jamna plains, for instance, are demolished before the onset of the monsoons, so that very middle class or upper middle class colonies don't get flooded, there is an imbalance there. There is an inequity there. There is a lack of political participation there. Or for instance, when slums are demolished for punitive reasons, that again has to do with sustainable development, with climate justice. And when I was reading all this, I remembered this book that I used to read in college. It was called An Introduction to Political Philosophy by Jonathan Wolfe. And the book started by asking two questions. What is politics? Actually, just the one question, two answers to it. What is politics? And the answers were, politics tells you who gets what, and B says who. Who gets what, says who. So then sustainable development and environmental justice is actually a deeply political question. Who gets what? Who gets clean air? Who gets clean water? Who has access to resources? Who has claims to land? And then for the first time, it made sense to me why Greta Thunberg, for instance, who started off being an environmental justice advocate, and she's still basically that, why did she find herself compelled to be on the Freedom Flotilla, making her way to Gaza? Because questions about land are not unrelated to sustainable development. Questions about land are not unrelated to questions about environmental justice, to questions about climate justice. And even here, when we talk about deforestation, when we talk about mining, taking land back, which causes displacements, these are the fundamental questions then. We're taking land back from indigenous people for what reasons? Who will get that land? Who will decide who gets that land? So who gets what and says who? How will we negotiate those questions? And I must add that this recent narrative about illegal migrants, the Ghuspatias as we like to call them, are also connected basically to land and to resources, and therefore to sustainable development, therefore to climate justice, to environmental justice. Last of all, it's called, the topic today is called Sustainable Development and the Idea of India Therein. But if we read it the other way around, the idea of India and sustainable development therein, that would make equal sense, because the idea of India was very much about sustainable development also. I read the Hind Swaraj this morning, because again, that is about the idea of India. Slim volume, also published in 1909, but suitably then barred in 1910 for being seditious literature. That's again in keeping with how we quickly call anti-mining or anti-dam movements seditious even today. But Hind Swaraj talked basically about small economies, village economies, decentralized economies, sustainable development, which might seem very impractical today, but there is an idea of India. And I want to leave you today with juxtaposing Hind Swaraj with the visuals of the migrant workers trying to return home during COVID, the long march back. That also happened in India. I'm not sure whether that is an idea of India, but that was India very recently. So Hind Swaraj, the migrant workers marching back, the long march home, how do we look at sustainable development within these two frameworks? But may I start with Parameshwar? You come and give your opening remarks.